This combines many things we've learned in this module.
So we're going to wait and then put out point. So let's just go through the steps we have to do. The first thing we're told to do is wait for the mouse to be pressed and released. Now you might be tempted to do that by saying if standard draw dot mouse pressed. Then let's just put out some information about this. I'm just going to print that it was pressed. Then I'm going to wait for it to be released. If not, standard draw dot mouse pressed. Okay, so let's see how this works out for us. Okay, so I didn't do anything with the mouse. And what happened was the program runs so quickly compared to human behavior that this if statement, if it's pressed, that's going to be false. I'm not pressing the mouse, and so it doesn't do that. And it gets to this statement right away, much quicker than I could do anything, and then just prints the word released. So what's wrong with this code is that it's not waiting for the mouse to be pressed. And to wait for the mouse to be pressed, I have to wait until that event happens. So let's sketch this again in a different way. So here, the mouse has been pressed. And a way to make that happen with a while loop is to put the complement of that. So while it's not pressed, I want to do nothing and wait. So this loop will go repeatedly until the mouse has been pressed. And then I want to do the same thing here. The mouse is released. And so I want to do the same idea here and repeat while the mouse is pressed. Do nothing. So the complement of this predicate is true here. The mouse has been pressed. The complement of the predicate is true here. The mouse is not pressed. And let's put in our statements. Pressed, and here, released. Okay, so let's run this. I'll have to narrate what I'm doing. So I'm not doing anything. The mouse is moving around. I'm going to press it. And I have it held down right now, and I can move the mouse around, it doesn't matter. And then I'm going to release it. And sure enough, my program accurately detects the pressed and released, using really what we know about the logic of a while loop's predicate, that the complement of it must be true if the while loop ever exits. The last thing really to say about this is that we don't want to be in a tight loop. And so to avoid the tight loop, we're going to pause for, let's say, 100 milliseconds, and the same thing here. And 100 milliseconds is certainly speedy enough so that you'll find out soon enough after I press. So I'll tell you when I press, now, and I release, now. Now if I made this interval much larger, let's suppose I make it 2 seconds. What's the downside to that? I'm pressing now, but see the delay of the message, and I'm releasing, and see that was also delayed. Let's do that again. I'm pressing now and releasing now. A slight delay. Okay, so we can make this much better by just reducing this down to 100 milliseconds. And within 100 milliseconds we will detect the press and release, and that's certainly speedy enough. Now, now.
Let's turn this into the application we really want.
Let's get rid of our informative messages here. And at this point, we're supposed to draw point at the location of the mouse. So this reads the x and y coordinates of the mouse, and we'll draw a point at that location. Let's go ahead and run this. We're no longer producing output, so I'll get rid of that window. So I can move my mouse around. We're waiting for me to press the mouse. I press and release it there, and there's a tiny, tiny point there. It's so small that we really can't see it very well. Let's make it bigger by changing the radius. To be 0.01. And I'm going to do it here. Okay, so that's a much more noticeable point. We can make it more pronounced if we wanted. But every time I run this program, I get to press it just once and get a point. And until I release it, the mouse location won't be read. So to see that, I'll press and then move the mouse around and release all the way up there, and it's at the point of release that the XY coordinate is actually put down. And that's because we don't draw the point until we've released the mouse, and so mouse X and mouse Y return the point at the release. Then we have to wait for the user to type a cue. So how do we do that? Let's wait. Let's do the first part. So while there's nothing typed, we have to wait. But we know not to wait in a tight loop, so we're going to pause for 100 milliseconds. Then we're going to read the key. Let's capture it. Okay, and if that's a cue, then we're going to write text on the screen to say goodbye. So let's do standard draw.text, and I'll put it centered halfway in the screen. I'll be a little dramatic, say farewell. Okay. Now what if you don't type a cue? Now what we want to do, well, okay, so let's run this and see what happens. So I wait till I type a point. I click to get a point. Then I'm going to type a cue, and it says farewell in the center. So that's great. But what happens if I didn't type the cue? So let's suppose I do my point, and then I type an S. Then nothing happens. So what I need to do is use what I know about writing a while loop and realize that at this point, at some point, I want to be able to say that a cue definitely has been typed. So let's reframe this code here and know that here a cue has been typed. And know that's going to be the end of a while loop. So I'm going to end the while loop here and begin it up here. And the indentation's all off, but we'll fix that in a second. I'll just say while true here for a moment. And what I want is while the got key is not a cue. So I need to move this up here. And I can't give it the character that's been typed yet, but I can give it something that's not a cue. I'll just give it a space. And then once I get the next key typed, got key is going to be that next key that was typed. Okay, so while got key is not a cue, we go on forever. We have our pause here, which is good. This pause is sufficient because once we exit this loop, we immediately just come around and either pause again. So I don't need to pause inside this outside loop. It's just this loop here that might spin tightly. So if you type any other key, you'll come back around and try again. And nothing is said about that, but there's no instruction that says we have to do that. Okay, so let's try this out. We get to put a point someplace. I'm typing an E, nothing happens. A T, nothing happens. A Q, and it says farewell.